with a sunshiny smile, heard the roar of a plane as it sailed through the sky. To her playmate she cried with a bright twinkling eye, my daddy rides that ship in the sky. Oh, my daddy rides that ship in the sky. My daddy rides that ship in the sky. Mama's not afraid and neither am I, 'cause my daddy rides that ship in the sky. Then a pug-nosed kid, as he kicked up his heel, says, my daddy works in the iron and the steel. Yes, my daddy makes planes so they fly through the sky, and that's what keeps your daddy up there so high. Oh, that's what keeps your daddy up there so high. That's what keeps your daddy up there so high. If you're not afraid, then neither am I, 'cause my daddy keeps your daddy up in the sky.
Jamie O'Rourke was the laziest man in Ireland. He would do anything in the world to avoid working, especially if it had to do with potatoes. He would lie around all day long, and his wife Eileen would say to him, Jamie O'Rourke, we'll have nothing to eat this winter if you don't get up and dig up the praties. Praties were potatoes. Well, Jamie would say, oh, dear wife, as sure as I'm talking, my back'll break if I so much as get out of this bed. Well, so Eileen, who had already planted the potatoes and weeded the potatoes and watered the potatoes, would get up and dig up the smallest praties in Ireland, all because her husband was too lazy to dig a bigger garden, and they were too poor to buy better potato seeds. But then one day, Eileen really did hurt her back, and she was stuck in bed. Well, you'd think that with his wife stuck in bed, Jamie O'Rourke would get up and go to work. That would be a good prediction, wouldn't it? You have to predict things in school. That would be a good prediction, except that Jamie O'Rourke was the laziest man in Ireland. And so he says to himself, he says, with Eileen sick in bed, there'll be no praties. With no praties, there'll be no food. With no food, I'll starve to death. There's no telling how soon death will be knocking at my door. I'd best go and confess my sins to Father O'Malley so that I can go to heaven when I die. And so in the middle of the night, Jamie O'Rourke got up out of bed and started down the hill to the church. Well, about halfway down the hill, he heard a little singing and tapping. He come up nice and close, and he pulled back the ferns. And there, sitting in the middle of the moonlight, was a leprechaun. Well, Jamie knew just what to do. He grabbed that fella by the coattails and held him up in the air. Let me go! Let me go, said the little fella. Not on your life, said Jamie. Not until you take me to your pot of gold. You see, everybody in Ireland knows that the leprechauns make dancing shoes for the fairies, and the fairies pay them with their gold. And that if you catch a leprechaun, he'll pay for his freedom with his gold. But this leprechaun was a little smarter than most. Oh, Mr. Mortal Man, he says, I'm just starting out in the trade, and I've only got 2 pieces of gold. Won't you take a wish instead? A wish? And what would I be wishing for, says Jamie, me whose wife is sick in bed and can't get up and I'm about to starve to death. Well, you could wish for a magic potato seed. You could just water it a couple of times and you'd have enough food for the whole winter. Well, that sounded pretty good to the laziest man of Ireland. Done, he says. And he let that fella go. He dropped the potato seed in his hand, scampered up over the hill. Well, when Jamie O'Rourke got home and told Eileen what he had done. She says, "Jamie O'Rourke, you're not only the laziest man in Ireland, but you're a fool as well. What are we going to do with this magic potato seed?" "Faith, I'll plant it in the old sea." And Faith, she did see. For in 2 or 3 weeks, up out of the ground came an enormous potato. It lifted up the shed. It lifted up the corner of the house. "Well," says Jamie, "it's time to dig up the potato." Jamie went out there with his shovel and he was digging and pushing. It was the most work he'd done in a year. But try as he might, he couldn't budge that potato. Well, there was a fella from the village. He came walking by, saw Jamie with that great big enormous potato, and he told everybody in the village, and pretty soon they were all gathered around Jamie looking at him. "Jamie," they says, "where did you get that potato?" "Well," says Jamie, "I got it from a leprechaun." "From a leprechaun," they says. "How did you do that, Jamie?" He says, "Well, if you'll help me get this potato out of the ground, I'll tell you all about it." So Jamie sat down nice and comfortable and began telling the tale while all the people in the village began digging and pushing and shoving and prying. And in not too long that had that potato loosened up, and all of a sudden it come pop out of the ground. It rolled down the hill, took one more bump down at the bottom of the hill, sailed up in the air and came down smack dab wedged between the 2 rock walls on the entry road into town. Well, the constable come by. He says to Father O'Malley, "Somebody's going to have to move that potato. There's no one can get into town around. It's in the middle of the road." "Well," says the people to Jamie, "it's your potato. You'll have to get it out of there." But Eileen spoke up. She says, "Well, now, there's enough food there, enough potato for everybody. Why don't you all cut off a piece of that potato and take it home? You'll have plenty to eat." Sounded like a good idea. Everyone went home and they got their axes and saws and their knives, and they cut and they chopped and they sawed. And within a few hours, the potato was gone. Well, all that winter, they had potato to eat. They had potato for breakfast. They had potato for lunch. They had potato for supper. At first it tasted pretty good. But after a while they started to get to where they didn't want to see another potato again. Well, come the springtime, Jamie come up to his friends and he says, "I've got me the eye from the potato. I'm going to plant it. Now plant another potato." "Jamie O'Rourke," they says, "please don't plant another potato. We're sick of potato, Jamie. Please don't plant another one. We'll tell you what, if you don't plant that potato seed, we promise you that for the rest of your days, we'll see that you and Eileen have enough to eat." That sounded like a pretty good deal to the laziest man in Ireland. So he says to Eileen, he says, "You see now, I wasn't so foolish to take that potato seed after all." And truth is, she'd have to admit that Jamie was right. Well, that story comes from a wonderful picture book by Tommy DePaola from an old Irish folk tale. There are various folk tales about Ireland. That's a wonderful tall tale about a potato, but there's another real story about potatoes and the Irish, and it's not so wonderful and it's not so happy as that one. You see, around the 1600s, the Irish, a few people brought in potatoes from the mountains in Spain, and they took wonderfly to the soil, and pretty soon the Irish became very dependent on those potatoes to live on. By the 1700s, they were the major part of their diet. The poor farmers who had very, very little money subsisted really every day on just about nothing but potatoes. Now, potatoes have a great deal of protein. I never realized that. and complex carbohydrates and vitamins, so they really did pretty well on it. But then, in 1845, came the potato famine. It was called the blight. And the blight was a fungus that came across the ocean on the ships. And very, very quickly it spread like wildfire across the Irish countryside. And it spotted and destroyed all the potatoes so quickly. If you read Nori Ryan's song by Patricia Riley Giff, as in many cases with a historical novel, you kind of get an inside feel for it. And the way she describes the coming of the blight is really frightening. She discovers it one day when she hears this scream across the fields, and then she smells this stench coming toward her. And the scream was a neighbor, a distant neighbor, discovering that all their potatoes were ruined, and the stench was the stench of that fungus coming to her. And the very next day, she discovers it in her own garden. And she and her sister look, and they can't find barely any potatoes that are not already destroyed. When she walks through the garden, this brown ooze comes out on her skirt. Well, they pick the only potatoes that they can find that are still looking good. By the time they get in the house, those potatoes too are spotted, so they begin cutting out the spots of the potato. But by the time they get the spots out and they put the rest of it in the pot with water, the water turns black with the fungus by the time it boils. And they turn to their pig and their chickens to get food to subsist on, but the landlord's agent comes in and he takes those away because they're behind on the rent. You see, what made the blight so bad was not just the potatoes, it was that 95% of the Irish lived in homes owned by the British. They had conquered the country some time before, and they treated them terribly. And so when they got behind on their rent, they just kicked them out right away. 1 million of the 8 million Irish died of hunger, starvation, during that potato famine. And 1 million more Irish were able to board ships and come to the United States. And that was the biggest wave of Irish that have ever come to our country. And it's probably the biggest reason why we have so many Irish people in our country now. Of course, we have many Scots-Irish descendants whose ancestors came earlier to the mountains. But this was the plain old Irish. Well, what many of them did, the way they found work, was they worked on the Transcontinental Railroad, which was being built across the United States. And they had a work song that they loved to sing called Paddy on the Railroad. It's got a great chorus. It's the second song I learned on the guitar when I was 9 years old.
And the real story is that about 150 years ago in Ireland, the potatoes got a disease called the blight. It came across the ocean on the ships, and all their potatoes turned bad. You couldn't eat them. They all turned bad, and people began to starve. Here's another chapter book, Nori Ryan's song. It tells what happened as the people got worse and worse starving and had to try different things to try to survive. And after a while, what most of them had to do, because they were starving to death, is go to America. They were very poor. And what made it worse was that the English people in the country next door owned almost all the homes. And when they couldn't earn any money, they were kicking them out of the homes. So they didn't have any home, they didn't have any food, and things got worse and worse. And so what 1 million of them did was they boarded a ship and they came to the United States. It was not a comfortable ride on that ship. They were stuck way down below, had a miserable time. Finally, they arrived in the United States, and they looked for work, and what many of them did for work was they helped to build the railroads which were coming across the United States at that time. Now here's a song that I learned when I was 9 years old, when I learned to play the guitar.
In 1841 I put me corduroy breeches on, I put me corduroy breeches on to work upon the railway. Fill-a-me-ory-ory-ay, 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 to work upon the railway. And that's your chorus. In 1842, left the old world for the new, med says to the lock that brought me through to work upon the railway. Fill-a-me-ory-ory-ay, 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 to work upon the railway. In 1843 is then I met sweet Biddy McGee, an elegant wife she's been to me while working on the railway. Fill-a-me-ory-ory-ay, 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 to work upon the railway. Our boss's name, it was Tom King, he kept a store to rob a man, a Yankee with an ink and pen, cheap hat on the railway. It's pat to this and pat to that, without a stocking or cravat, nothing but an old straw hat, to cheap hat on the railway. Fill-a-me-ory-ory-ay, 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 to work upon the railway. And when Pat lays him down to sleep, the wiry bugs around him creep, and devil a bit can poor Pat sleep while working on the railway. Fill-a-me-ory-ory-ay, 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 to work upon the railway. In 1846 they pelted me with stones and bricks, I was in a terrible fix while working on the railway. Fill-a-me-ory-ory-ay, 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 to work upon the railway.
In 1847, Billy Megan, she went to heaven. She left one kid, she left 11 to work upon the railway. Fill-a-me-ory-ory-ay, 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 to work upon the railway. It just happens that the first story I'm going to tell you comes from that country of Turkey. It's one of many, many stories told about a man who really lived, whose name was Nasruddin. Hoja wasn't really his last name. Hoja means teacher. He was considered a teacher, but he taught in a very odd way. Many of the stories that people have been telling ever since show him sometimes acting very foolish, and other times he acts very wise. And sometimes there's kind of a mix of the two. The story I want to tell you, I learned from another book, but you can find a version of it in the picture book called The Hungry Coat. Okay? It goes like this. One time, the Hoja was invited to a banquet at the home of the Mukhtar, a very important man in his village. Now, the Hoja was considered a wise man, Nasruddin, in his village. And he loved to eat. So being invited to a banquet was perfect. All day long as he was working in the garden, he was thinking, all that delicious food. As I'm eating that food, people will be asking my opinion about all kinds of interesting things. It will be great. All day long he was thinking about that as he was working in the garden, and he was thinking so hard that he didn't pay attention to the time. And he discovered when he had finished and he went home that if he wanted to bathe and he wanted to dress up in his fine clothes, he was going to be late for the banquet. He didn't want to do that. So he went on to the banquet in his work clothes, with dirt on his clothes and dirt on his hands, dirt on his face. And when he walked into the banquet, even though he was sure that the Mukhtar recognized him, The Mukhtar didn't pay him any attention. In fact, nobody did. And they seated him at the end of a long table in the back of the hall. And when the food finally came down to his end of the table, there was nothing left. So the Hoja, with his stomach empty and his feelings hurt, slipped out of the banquet and he went back home. When he got home, he bathed himself completely and then he put on his finest clothes. He put on an elegant shirt and baggy pants and a great big turban, and on top of it all, he put on his new fur coat. Well, this time, when he got to the banquet, the Mukhtar rose to meet him. And the servant took him and seated him right there beside the Mukhtar in the place of honor. The servants brought him tray after tray of delicious food, and he would take the foods and people were asking him questions, but as he took the food, he didn't eat it. He started stuffing it into the pockets of his coat.
Now, these weren't sandwiches and these weren't snack bars. This was meatballs covered in tomato sauce. This was fried zucchini and eggplant. This was stuffed vine leaves. He took the shish kebab and he slid it in through his shirt and let it drop down through his shirt. He took the yogurt with the cucumber taste to it and he rubbed it all over his shirt. And then he took a bowl of tomato soup, pulled out his pants, dropped it down his pants. Well, the Mukhtar was watching all this. Everybody was watching this. The people were standing there with their mouths open. The kids were laughing, of course, and they were trying to do the same thing as the parents looked at them. But the Mukhtar was not happy. He watched all this with frustration and embarrassment. And finally, when he poured that tomato soup down his pants, he said, "Hoja, what are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" "No," said the Hoja, "I haven't lost my mind. I'm just trying to teach you a little lesson. You see, when I came here earlier, dressed in my work clothes, you barely acknowledged me and you seated me at the end of a long table in the far corner of the room where there was no food and really not many people to talk to. When I came out dressed like this, you treated me as the guest of honor. But I haven't changed. It's only my clothes that have changed. So it must be my clothes that you are honoring. Out of respect, I'm feeding them first. Eat my clothes," he said. "You are the guest of honor." And with that, he stood up and he left the banquet.
And it's not important what a person looks like on the outside, it's the person inside. Well, this is a story of a kid growing up in one of those farm families. His sister is dying. His sister's dying from the pesticides that they've been spraying. He doesn't understand what's happening. He thinks it's something in the rain, something that's fallen down by the rain. But as the story goes along, he begins to understand probably this story has taken place right about the time that the United Farm Workers are organizing, and he begins to start to think about his life and maybe what he might be able to do about it. Called Something in the Rain. Mom and Dad have worked these fields. I don't know how many years. I'm just a boy, but I know how. Go to school, work is slow. We have seen our country's roads, from Bakersfield to Illinois. And when trouble comes our way,
pictures in your school books. Maybe you can take us there. There must be something in the rain. I'm not sure just what that means. I believe it talks of sins of men and us that's in our hands. There must be something in the rain. Oh, what else could cause this pain? Those airplanes cure the plants so things can grow. Oh no, there must be something in the rain. Little sister's gone away. Mama's working long again. And me, I think I understand about our life, about our land. The talkers talk and dreamers dream. I will find a place between. I'm afraid, but I believe we can change these urgent things. Because there's something in the rain. But there's more here in our hands. Well, leads us right about the sins of man, whose prophets rape the land. And the rains are falling down from the cities to the town. And until we stop this killing chain, there's something in the rain. I'd like to wind up with another song that's got a Latin American flavor to it. I've spent quite a bit of time traveling around Central America and South America. My wife's from Colombia, and it's an area that's had a tremendous amount of violence and civil wars in El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Colombia, where my wife comes from. And during one of the civil wars, a young U.S. citizen went down to just kind of see what was happening with his own eyes. And he saw that as in most wars, particularly civil wars, so many folks are killed who aren't actually on the battlefield. And he thought, just what a shame that folks are killing each other like this when we should be helping each other. We should be supporting each other and helping each other. And this storytelling is a wonderful way for us to kind of get in touch with folks not only from our own background and our own culture, but other people. So this seems like an appropriate way to finish. The song he wrote is called Somos el Barco, which means we are the boat. It's got a very simple bilingual chorus I want to teach you, and then some verses in English. And he said, instead of killing each other, we should be helping each other, because we need each other like a boat needs the sea, and the sea needs the boat. Chorus in English is simply, we are the boat, we are the sea, I sail in you, you sail in me. In Spanish, it's Somos el barco. Can you say that? Somos el barco. Somos el mar. Somos el mar. Yo navego en ti.
Yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí. Tú navegas en mí. Okay. Somos el barco, somos el mar. Yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the sea. I sail in you, you sail in me. Next time it comes around, see if you can help me. The boat that we are sailing on is built by many hands. The sea that we are sailing on, it touches many lands. Somos el barco, somos el mar, somos el mar. Yo navego en ti, yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the boat, we are the sea, we are the sea. I sail in you, I sail in you, you sail in me, you sail in me. The stream sings it to the river, you know the river sings it to the sea. The sea sings it to the boat that carries you and me. Somos el barco, somos el mar, somos el mar. Yo navego en ti, yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the boat, we are the sea, we are the sea. I sail in you, I sail in you, you sail in me. So with our hope we set the sail to go to sea once more, and with our hearts we chart the waters, never sail before. Somos el barco, somos el mar, somos el mar. Yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the boat, we are the sea. I sail in you, you sail in me. I sail in you, you sail in me.